December 7th, 1941. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. Less than 2 weeks later, Hitler sends out his own secret force. U-boat wolf packs.
They blew up anything that moved.
They'll attack America's east coast, sinking hundreds of ships, killing thousands of men.
All my heroes are asleep in the deep.
An assault so deadly, it's covered up by the U.S. government.
Loose lip-sync ship.
Oh, general quarters, battle stations.
Now, for the first time, a team of daring scientists are hunting for these wrecks. They're using cutting-edge technology on a brand-new mission.
We're trying to find something that no one's seen since 1942.
To discover the unknown story of the Nazi assault that almost cost the U.S. the war.
We've got a shipwreck, there's no doubt about it.
Hitler's secret attack on America.
Ein Schiff!
They called it Operation Drumbeat, a submarine blitzkrieg that brought Nazi forces right to America's shores. Most of the country never even knew it was happening.
2/3 vorwärts. Jetzt! Feuer!
Burning daylight.
Let's go check it out.
1, 2, 3.
Let it go under 28.
Everything in that trailer is going to go to the boat. Great.
Just off the coast of North Carolina, a scientific team is on a hunt to find out what really happened.
Go, 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 go. Keep coming. I got it.
Their goal, to find U-boats and their targets unseen for decades.
A lot of stuff.
Heading the mission is Chief Scientist Joe Hoyt.
We've been working on this for like 4 years. To finally, see it right here, it's pretty awesome.
Okay, very carefully. We'll swing that way.
When you tell people that there are German submarines coming up into the Chesapeake Bay and sinking ships with inside of shore, they're just surprised. The fact is that this whole conflict came right to our doorstep, and this is where it was. It's an important piece of American history that hasn't had its due.
They're loading up a brand new generation of gear. An AUV, an autonomous underwater scanner.
This AUV, that's our shipwreck hunting machine. In the big ocean, we need to cover a lot of ground, and this is the vehicle to do that.
Okay, we're ready? All right, okay, bring it up.
The team is heading out on a research vessel known as the SRVX.
There's a branch going off to the left. We're going straight.
Their destination, the turbulent waters off Cape Hatteras.
There's a lot of sand around here in the Outer Banks, and it moves. We need every inch of water that we can get. They're calling the depth for me. Yep. 8, 6, 7.
This deadly region has been called the graveyard of the Atlantic.
Okay, you jumped up to 12.
Thousands of shipwrecks are said to lie here. And this is where the German attack got underway. On December 11th, 1941, just 4 days after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Hitler declares war on the United States. For America, it's a distant threat from a distant land. But Hitler has a surprise in store. Within just a week, he orders his naval commander, Admiral Karl Dönitz, to launch a secret attack on America's east coast. Dönitz is the maestro of Germany's submarine fleet, the U-boats.
We really didn't realize the capabilities of these things. We didn't expect that they would hit us all the way across the Atlantic.
Dönitz believes in the power of a surprise attack, a lightning blitz off America's shores. And so the first U-boat wolf pack is sent to cross the ocean.
My father became a captain of his own U-boat very young. He himself only 27. You will not believe how 30-plus people were able to endure in a little metal tin. It was unimaginable.
By the first weeks of 1942, the U-boats are already showing up off America's shores. They find a country remarkably unprepared. A country with no idea that World War II is coming to the East Coast.
My father always told us the stories about his first impressions. He could not believe that he was able to watch the cars driving along the beach, that they were listening to the radio programs which they were receiving because they were so close to the coast, and they were listening to Bing Crosby and all the American music.
Each U-boat would receive top-secret orders, instructions decrypted on the infamous Enigma coding machine. Their main goal, not to attack America's war fleet, but to take out its merchant shipping, the crucial supply lines of oil and provisions that feed the war effort.
Ein Schiff! It's a tactic that's as old, really, as history itself. It was crucial that that fuel make it to Europe, make it to Great Britain. Feuer! To fuel the Allied war effort against the Germans.
The Nazis call it Paukenschlag, the roll of the drums. The first victim, the British ship Cyclops, on January 11th. The stealth attack is just getting started.
Operation Paukenschlag caught us entirely with our pants around our ankles. The Pacific, that's really where we saw our #1 threat. We left our eastern seaboard unprotected.
And the death toll is just beginning. Before the U-boat attacks end, America will lose over 200 ships and more than 2,000 men along its coastline. Out in the deep water, Joe's team begins its work to find them.
A lot of people talk about finding shipwrecks like you're looking for a needle in a haystack, but actually it's a little bit harder than that because we actually have to find the haystack first.
Come on, baby, come on.
Their goal, to map out an entire underwater battlefield of World War II shipwrecks.
It's just exciting to be out here. That this is one of the truly iconic American battlefields that existed for World War II, and it's right here in our backyard.
Well, why don't we zoom out so we can see the whole target area?
But several key pieces have eluded them, including 2 ships that went down in the vicious battle that marked the end of Operation Drumbeat, the tanker Bluefields and the German U-576 that brought it down. These 2 wrecks have never been found.
We're situated right off of Cape Hatteras.
They start their search on the edge of the continental shelf just off the coast, where the ocean floor drops off into deep water.
We are probably going to want to run with the continental shelf, mow the lawn that way.
Their first priority is a big sweep of the search area.
Don't hold the ball, just give them the tagline.
The biggest fear in this whole thing is the continental shelf. The big worry is that the remains of these vessels are off the shelf and that we see nothing, which would be a pretty big bummer.
Getting the AUV on and off the boat is the hardest task.
Launching and recovering the vehicle is definitely the most dangerous part of this whole operation.
It weighs about 500 pounds. It's very valuable, and there are some parts of it that are delicate, so we don't want it to hit the boat.
They run the AUV for over a week, covering 120 square miles.
Right now, we're on our 7th day of surveying. We've got the fish down at about 1,000 feet below us right now.
But on the last day, the weather picks up.
It's getting a little more sporty out here. It's starting to look like the graveyard of the Atlantic. It's gonna make getting the fish back a little bit more tricky.
As night falls, retrieving the AUV is becoming a challenge.
It's a little windier than we'd like, a little heavier sea than we've done so far, but the fish has got to come up and we're gonna give it a try. In theory, it's got some good data on it.
Danger, danger, danger! Blowing probably 20 to 25 knots out of the southwest.
If the AUV goes down, all its information will be lost.
I got it! That was wet. Watch your fingers, watch your fingers.
This is it, man. This is the last mission of this leg, so this will be the last bit of data that we get a chance to look at. This is where the rubber meets the road.
Now they'll see what history has left for them. In the first months of 1942, even as U-boats attacked from Canada to Florida, The U.S. Navy, led by Admiral Ernest King, is focusing all its attention on the Pacific Ocean.
As soon as Pearl Harbor was attacked, there was really a giant push to send all of our major warships to the Pacific because that's really where we saw our #1 threat.
To combat the U-boat menace in the Atlantic, there is only a ragtag collection of boats to patrol 1,500 miles of coastline, under the leadership of Admiral Adolphus Andrews.
The only thing we really had to combat German U-boats were improvised patrol craft, things like fishing trawlers and pleasure yachts that had depth charge racks and machine guns welded to them.
Manning these improvised warships are reservists and civilians pressed into action. The Merchant Marine.
The German submarines were off the Atlantic coast, and I decided to join the Merchant Marine and do my part.
I went on these rust buckets. I said, sir, someone has to do the job.
My first tour was a tanker. I was a young guy, only 17, and I slept with my life jacket on constantly. That was what I call fear.
They're sending some of the most advanced war machines of the time against us. It was really a one-way lopsided battle.
On the hunt for the ships that went down, the team on the research vessel is about to get its first look at the underwater images from the AUV.
There's definitely something here. It could be anything from some fishing gear to a refrigerator.
What emerges is like an ultrasound, not always easy to read, but full of potential.
This is our first really hard target. I say without a doubt that there's a shipwreck there.
Over the next hour, more and more possibilities emerge.
Ooh.
That's really nice.
The team soon realizes the concern is not having enough targets, it's having too many.
That's humongous.
They've uncovered 49 possible shipwrecks, enough for years of hunting.
We're gonna have more targets than we know what to do with.
Their search just got a lot harder. With dozens of potential shipwreck targets, Joe Hoyt and his team are feeling the pressure.
We're challenged now of narrowing down what could potentially be a pretty large number of potential targets. We only have a limited amount of time that we can get back to some of these sites to investigate them further.
They want to map out an entire underwater World War II battlefield. But the real prize, an undiscovered shipwreck that may just be the 2,000-ton freighter, the Bluefields, or its attacker, the U-576.
The holy grail of this project is finding the 576 and the Bluefields. If we can do that, we're going to really go home happy.
This is our first priority target. One of the best things we can look at is size.
This is the approximate size for something like a U-boat, but it also may be a much older wreck.
The team has 7 top priority targets, but they won't know exactly what they've found until they get a better look.
Once I get it up, I'm going to get it out as far as I can.
They bring in a brand new sub-hunter, a cutting-edge AUV that zooms in to generate high-resolution images.
It's a pretty cool piece of the technology. This vehicle will go down and with a much finer tooth comb allow us to understand what we're seeing on the seabed.
All right, bring it down real quick and don't pull away, pull away.
Forward!
They're zeroing in on an area 20 miles off the coast of Hatteras, where 2 giant ocean currents collide, creating the Diamond Shoals.
This is a sort of a bottleneck right here. That's a known ship trap, just treacherous to mariners.
Boats hugging the shore would be forced into deeper water.
This presents kind of an ideal location for U-boats to hunt because it provides access to the shipping lanes, but also quick access to deep water where they can hide.
Right hot spot right now.
By the spring of 1942, German tactics seem unstoppable. The U-boats move in under cover of darkness. Along the coast, lights shine brightly. Each boat that passes is a backlit target. The Germans can't believe it's so easy.
My father's first couple of weeks in the waters on the American coast were pretty easy for him. He himself sank about 5 ships within a couple of weeks.
Veteran Captain Anders Johansson, a father of 2, has been at sea his whole life. He knows there are few defenses for merchant ships like his Dixie Arrow, a giant tanker carrying 96,000 barrels of vital crude oil en route from Texas to New Jersey. On March 26, 1942, as the Dixie Arrow approaches the treacherous area off Cape Hatteras, Captain Johansson knows his ship is a sitting duck.
Mayday, this is the tanker, Dixie Arrow. Contact of enemy submarine. We're sinking.
Bridge, CIC, the tanker, Dixie Arrow, reporting Mayday.
Captain Johansson changes into his dress uniform. He's going down with the ship.
We could see the blaze at night and the smoke in the daytimes. And they'd burn sometimes for days, those oil tankers.
The whole ocean was on fire around it, and we could see the men jumping off the ship into the fire.
Left full rudder.
And you could smell the burning, and a lot of it wasn't oil, a lot of it was other things burning.
For the first time in over 100 years, foreign invaders are dominating America's coastal waters. For the Germans, it will become known as the Great American Turkey Shoot. Dozens of tankers, 2 million tons of war supplies will go down.
So what chance did we have? No chance at all.
The crews celebrate with makeshift medals in place of Knight's Crosses their commanders will receive. The U-boats are inflicting terrible damage as Admiral King's Navy is focused on the Pacific Theater, 5,000 miles away.
German U-boats came to the eastern shores of the United States and basically just blew up anything that moved.
It is already shaping up as the U.S. Navy's worst defeat in history.
I think most Americans would be stunned to know that the enemy was right off our coast, did so much damage.
These attacks are so shocking, so destructive. America's leaders do something unprecedented. They keep them secret. The government begins a propaganda campaign to suppress the news.
There was a saying, loose lips sink ships.
Loose lips sink ships.
Loose lips sink ships.
The newspapers didn't want to demoralize the Americans by saying so many ships were going down and all the crews were being lost. Horrendous.
They wanted to keep it quiet so that people didn't really know how badly we were being beat in our own backyards.
It's one of the great cover-ups in American history. Now on board the SRVX, the team is hot on the trail of the shipwrecks. The new AUV has just finished its run.
Trying to pick up the AUV. Hopefully we'll be able to have a look at it here in the next couple minutes.
Get the hook in your hand.
But the weather is working against them. The crew is getting concerned about the AUV and the waves.
I'm gonna jump in. So getting the place where it's pretty close, and I'll just go for it.
I've been focusing my entire life on the Battle of the Atlantic and these merchant vessels that are sunk here. And this is the first time that I felt as close to these things as I ever have.
Despite the risks, Joe decides to bring it in himself.
We're trying to pick up this fish, but we got probably some of the rougher seas that we've seen so far.
Finally, they get the AUV back on deck with its crucial data inside. The seafloor scans.
Kind of exciting to get it back on, but we got it back and we're ready to go check out the data.
But their excitement is about to be dampened. It turns out that in the retrieval, the AUV suffered serious damage.
It's kind of airy for a while. This vortex of death, as we call it, behind the boat, where all the water is swirling, resulted in a pretty dicey recovery of the vehicle. Cracked it.
Having that replaced in the time frame that we need is just not going to happen.
With their goal in sight, the hunt has hit a major snag.
It's a bit of a drag. We're kind of dead in the water.
With the AUV knocked out, Joe's team scrambles to move into the next phase of the mission, the diving, to map out the battlefield.
We've got a limited amount of time, a limited amount of dough, and these dive ups are going to allow us to get onto a number of sites that are associated with the Battle of the Atlantic.
The hurricane season is upon them, and they have only 1 week to accomplish their mapping. If they want to get down to all their wrecks, they'll have to move fast.
Dive, dive, dive!
With the AUV in repairs, Joe Hoyt's team hurries to move up the schedule and get into the diving.
This is the stuff that you sit in your office all year and look forward to.
History is tangible right here off the North Carolina coast.
This is where we get to actually go and see some of the sites that we've been working on.
More fish.
More fish, that's good.
Their first targets are ones that have been identified but not fully mapped, like the U-boat victim, the E.M. Clark. A World War II tanker carrying almost 120,000 barrels of heating oil, sunk by one of the most infamous U-boat captains, Johann Moore, who took down 29 ships in just 6 patrols.
So we're getting ready to dive on the wreck of the E.M. Clark. Totally intact, stem to stern.
But this war grave will take them to the edge of recreational diving and beyond, down in 260 feet of water.
Roger that. Divers have generally avoided this area just because it's difficult to get to.
To help out, a new group will join Joe and his team, the Woods Hole Deep Submergence Divers. They are the test pilots of the undersea world.
Here's the plan.
They're led by Evan Kovacs, a legendary deep water diver.
They're going to position the boat way up current. Rich and Steve, you're with me. We'll get up right in on top of the boat. Everybody will jump in.
His teammate, Becky Schott, is one of the few women in the world doing this kind of daring work.
With conditions out here with seas, currents, and the depth, it all makes for a pretty challenging dive.
Their diving apparatus is state-of-the-art, rebreathers developed by the Navy SEALs.
1500 psi on the oxygen.
This system recycles one breath over and over so they can stay on the bottom much longer than the average diver. But if something malfunctions, there may not be enough time to resurface.
It's going to be a hot dive.
We're gonna get the kicked out of us.
Dive, dive, dive.
History is waiting on the ocean floor. By mid-1942, an ominous new strategy is about to be launched: sabotage on our shores. Admiral Dönitz charges young Captain Horst Deacon and his boat, the U-701, with a top-secret mission to drop German mines in the Chesapeake Bay. It's a dangerous task, right next to the biggest U.S. Navy base on the East Coast.
My father's U-boat had to find their way as close as they could towards the mouth of Chesapeake Bay.
Cloud. Fire!
They planted all these mines and left without being detected.
All just yards off America's coast.
Sehr romantisch.
At the same time, another set of subs is carrying out an even more daring plan.
Germans decided to send people to this country who were to sabotage war industries.
The aim, to place Nazi terror teams on U.S. soil, to blow up bridges and tunnels and paralyze factories and power plants. But things go wrong. They hit the only beach within 100 miles, patrolled around the clock by a Coast Guard station. Police round up the spies. They are interrogated and then executed. Another chapter in a story never reported to the American awestruck.
It was just a stunning, stunning dive.
Beautiful dive. Gorgeous wreck.
Man, that was good, dude.
Well, it's wicked awesome, man.
It's an impressive sight.
Joe and his team add the shipwrecks to their charts of the undersea battlefield. But with only a few days remaining,
Sea states on the edge.
Conditions here are marginal.
they're running out of time to complete their mission. The AUV is still out of commission, so the team decides to keep hunting with an ROV, a remotely operated vehicle.
We rarely have the opportunity to play with a lot of the big boy toys. This will be the largest amount of technology that anyone's ever thrown at these World War II wrecks off the coast here. Put it in the water?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
The ROV is an undersea rover with HD and 3D cameras, all attached by fiber optic cable to its driver topside.
This way, move back. I gotta bring this in and I wanna shorten that up.
This is the system that's actually going to let us get down on some of the sites that we haven't seen before. Hopefully we'll be able to identify them. That's the real goal. I really can't wait to see what we can do.
I'll be back.
With the ROV prepped and ready, the team's mission to rediscover the hero of one of World War II's great U-boat stories. A fishing trawler designated the YP-389, a slow fishing boat that didn't even have proper showers.
It was a small converted fishing trawler that was outfitted with a couple machine guns and a little deck gun, and it was sent to sea to kind of do a service that it was never intended to do. And they come up against one of the greatest weapons of World War II.
In the early hours of June 19th, 1942, the YP-389 will find itself locked in a duel to the death. It's 2:45 a.m., and the 389 is on patrol. What Captain Phillips doesn't know is that he is being watched.
Fire!
Battle stations. All hands, man your battle stations. This is not a drill.
Like much of the ship, the main deck gun is waiting for missing parts. It has no firing pin.
Man, you're gone!
All they've got are machine guns. The YP battles for over an hour, but the deadly U-boat keeps coming. They know they're doomed to fail, but they keep trying to hold on until they run out of time.
Abandoned ship!
All hands, abandoned ship.
This battle basically personifies the entire struggle of the small American Navy off of our coast against the German U-boats.
The final resting place of the YP-389 was listed unknown for more than half a century. But now, tethered to the deck of the SRVX, an ROV is descending hundreds of feet. It is piloted topside.
The person who's operating the ROV is able to see in 3D, like it's his eyes, exactly what the ROV is seeing.
We need to make it a lot darker in here. I can't see anything.
Everyone scans for any sign of a shipwreck.
There it is, there it is. Wow.
This could well be the YP-389, but they can't be sure until they spot proof.
That?
There it is.
Yeah, that's it.
Ah, look at that.
It's the misfiring deck weapon that clinches it.
That is good. Oh, that is awesome. Whoa.
The wreck of the YP-389, the once feisty fishing trawler, now war grave to 6 men.
The smoking gun that allowed us to identify it in this case was actually a gun. The 3-inch 23 caliber gun is typically something that you don't find on a fishing trawler.
Now the team wants to see the YP-389 in person.
Putting people on the site will be a huge deal. We're really excited about trying to do that. The last people that actually saw this and touched it were the ones that were aboard it in 1942.
But it's over 300 feet down. A dangerous technical descent. Only the rebreather team will attempt it.
It's a very small target, so we may or may not hit it.
The divers head out to assess the situation.
We have an extremely high current at this site.
We also have Hurricane Emily coming up the coast.
Out in the Zodiac, The waves look immense.
We're showing that we might have as much as 3, maybe 4 knots of current, which is pretty screaming. It really makes diving a lot more dangerous.
If an emergency happens, we'd be in for a really bad day.
Right now, we're at the mercy of the elements. I don't think they'll hit it.
They can get down.
Crapshoot. If it takes them 5 minutes to get to the bottom, and it takes them a minute to look around for the wreck, they could be 100,000 yards away, and then they're just...
They're coming back? I think the divers are actually coming back to the boat. I think they already made the call. They're not going to dive.
Conditions just aren't safe. The dive must be called off.
It's tough, you know, there's a balance between safety and kind of keep that urge to push forward.
We're all a little bummed out right now.
It looks like it's going to be it for today. Everyone's kind of feeling a little defeated.
I don't want to talk right now.
With limited time, they'll have to move on. The YP-389 has eluded the dive team. By the summer of 1942, the U-boat's toll of death and destruction has reached an all-time high. Hundreds of Allied ships, millions of tons of cargo, thousands of lives.
German U-boats basically just fired a torpedo at any big ship that moved.
The anxiety, worrying about, are they going to get us, are they going to get us?
U-boats basically had a great time, so to speak.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, Admiral Dönitz steps up the pressure. His U-boat captains must sink as many tankers and cargo ships as fast as they can. This is Germany's moment to win the war.
150 Meter.
As the weather clears, Joe's team moves on, mapping the underwater battlefield. The divers turn their focus to what may be the most important descent of the expedition.
Right now, I'm just thinking about getting in the water.
One of the key U-boats of Operation Drumbeat.
Yeah, I want to get near the stern.
The U-701, the sub that sank the YP-389 and mined the Chesapeake Bay.
The U-701 has one of the most incredible histories of any of these wrecks associated with the Battle of the Atlantic.
Hidden for decades, the U-701 was uncovered by a hurricane in 2004. But Joe's team has been held off by the weather again and again.
The U-701 is a fickle sight. Sight in the summer. This is, I think, our 4th attempt, possibly 5th, losing count at this point.
To the platform, please.
No problem.
Once we get the camera, we should be drifting for a minute or two down current.
Cameras are go, the cameras are go.
Trying to get 2 boats, 6 divers, and a camera all put out at the same time, all hitting a very small target of a submarine. That's a challenge.
Dive, dive, dive.
Underwater, the divers hope for the best. But the raging currents off Cape Hatteras show no signs of cooperating.
We don't have much confidence that it was done right.
Suddenly, the divers surface early.
Our divers popped up about 300 yards past where we were looking for them. And that's just one of the dangers. They probably misdirected.
They took the line to us. Yeah, I had a problem. Anybody make it to the wreck? I don't know, man. I couldn't swim back to the line. I couldn't physically swim against it.
The divers are exhausted and didn't even get close to the wreck.
Some days you're the bug, some days you're the windshield.
They'll have to try again. The U-boat won't give up its secrets easily. By the beginning of July 1942, there are more U-boats off America's coast than at any time since the war began. But the U.S. strategy to strike back is coming together. The convoy system. The tankers now have destroyers and aircraft patrols to protect them.
Contact. Enemy submarine. Relative bearing. 320. Range. 2,000 yards.
Oh, general quarters. General quarters. Battle stations.
My father's U-boat had to surface and American bomber plane came down through the clouds.
Flugzeug. Scheiße. Target. Relative bearing. 270. Range. 500 yards.
For Captain Horst Deegan's U-701, like many other U-boats, the tide is turning.
100 Meter! 100 Meter!
They made a picture-perfect dive on this U-boat, laid down a spread of 3 depth bombs that straddled the conning tower and sent it straight to the bottom.
It was only a matter of seconds for them to decide what to do. So he opened the hatch and they went one after the other who was near it, and they popped up like a champagne cork up to the surface.
In the case of the U-701, a handful of men remarkably survived.
Out of those 25 people who had got out of the U-boat, only 7 people were extremely lucky to have survived.
Once the convoy system went into place, it was this pendulum swing of German U-boats mercilessly attacking Allied shipping, and then the shift of that into us mercilessly attacking German U-boats.
On the site where the U-701 went down, the dive team prepares for a second attempt to find the wreck.
And right now we're getting ready to drop 3 divers out on the wreck site.
We're going to break them down in 2 teams and drop them right on the buoy.
Should we give it a go, boys, then?
Now or never, dudes.
They fight their way down to the bottom. And there, on the ocean floor, the terror of the Atlantic, the U-701. The deck gun, the conning tower, and the signature knife-edge stern. All their attempts have paid off. They are face to face with one of Hitler's deadly gray wolves. This wreck was once a lethal weapon. 220 feet long, this Type 7C U-boat, the workhorse of the German Kriegsmarine. Armed with 14 torpedoes and 1 deck gun, this U-boat wreaked havoc on Allied ships and shut down the entire Chesapeake Bay. When the team emerges, they're all smiles.
Come here, you. Show me the lot, man.
701 was fantastic.
Absolutely fantastic.
What did you see down there? Saw a submarine.
The team adds the U-701 to their underwater battlefield. But one shipwreck still eludes them, and it's one of the key targets from the climactic battle of Operation Drumbeat. As the expedition nears its end, the team has one last chance to identify one of the wrecks that stayed hidden: the tanker Bluefields and the U-576.
Today is the grand finale of our expedition. Having the chance to get out and be the first person to see something that sunk almost 70 years ago is pretty awesome. All right, this is it.
Okay, let it out about another 20 feet.
We're going to try and put the ROV onto our priority #1 target.
The ROV will be tethered to the boat and transmit images back to the SRVX.
Can we pull that slack out of the line there?
Inside the ship's lab, Joe and the Woods Hole team monitor the ROV's progress. Will this unidentified wreck turn out to be one of Operation Drumbeat's last victims?
Right now, we've got a shipwreck that's a potential candidate for the Bluefield site. As it is right now, it's an unknown target, and we're trying to change that. That would really be the sort of the icing on the cake for this whole project.
They get an intriguing indication: the fish that often circle shipwrecks.
Your lights on.
There you go.
You got fish.
But almost immediately, they run into a new set of problems.
Every time we maneuver the vessel, we end up dragging the tether and the ROV connected to it.
We just seemed to take some fiber hits, some pretty serious fiber hits, so we lost the camera.
What do you guys think? I mean, is that... There's really no recourse at this point.
They decide to pull up the ROV. It's a bittersweet moment. On the verge of discovering what may be a brand new wreck, they've hit a dead end.
A little bit bummed out right now. You know, you always kind of trick yourself into thinking the last pass of the day is going to be the one.
With no images, they can't say for sure. But on their way back to land, a shocking discovery.
What is that? Oh my God, check it out!
Oh, wow! To their surprise, the camera failed, but the sonar picked up an image.
That was awesome. This is our first bit of data that we've gotten back from the vehicle of our priority 1 target. We're already seeing really definable features, so it looks pretty incredible. Pretty excited about it.
We did 6 passes doing a 200 meter by 200 meter grid. The length of the wreck was in the order of 70 some meters, 260, 50 feet, right? Yeah.
The fact that it was isolated and then the approximate dimensions of it indicate that it's very likely to have been a man-made target, and we hope it's bluefields.
It looks fantastic. This is our first priority target. We've got a shipwreck. There's no doubt about it.
It's likely that tanker Bluefields, one of the last victims of the 6-month siege on the Atlantic coast of the United States. By the late summer of 1942, America's new convoy strategy is making the difference. 5 U-boats have been sunk in the past 4 months.
When we instituted the convoy system, well, that was pretty much the beginning of the end for the U-boats.
The minute the Allies organized their defenses and formed convoys with heavy protection, the days were numbered.
The U-boats would never again be so powerful a weapon in the Atlantic. And so one of the crucial and remarkably little-known battles of the Second World War would be won by an unheralded assortment of ships, manned by fledgling officers and untested crews. The Atlantic coast would be safeguarded.
I'd do it over again if I had to.
Just 15 miles off Cape Hatteras, Joe Hoyt and his team marked the end of a remarkable season of exploration with a memorial service for the men of the Merchant Marine, the sailors whose final resting places they have charted.
The Merchant Mariners, they're sort of the unsung heroes. It's a really classic story of sacrifice and in many cases, triumph.
They bring the SRVX into position above the Dixie Arrow.
They fought just as hard as the guys in the trenches and on ships with more guns.
Without the Merchant Marine, the war could never have been won by the U.S.
We lost a lot, a great amount we lost. But you know what? We did the job. I'm not a hero, just remember that. All my heroes are asleep in the deep.
As the team wraps up its work for the season, they too have scored several major successes.
We've spent 4 years trying to uncover the story of the Battle of the Atlantic and really understand what was going on here.
It is the first time ever that an archaeological group has pieced together an entire undersea battlefield in this region.
This is one of the truly iconic American battlefields that existed for World War II, and it's right here in our backyard.
The battlefield of a 6-month naval siege that almost turned the tide of war. A moment the world hung in the balance, when America defeated